Hi, my name is Peggy van de Plassche, and today I want to tell you more about the best career book I read so far this year. I realize it's only February, but still I wanted to share it because I really, really love it. So the book is called The Long Game, and the subtitle of the book is How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And it's written by Dorie Clark. So it is not a new book, actually. She published it in 2021, but I just picked it up recently. So I wanted to share it in case you have not read it. And if you did already, maybe you will want to pick it up again. And, I've always loved reading. And maybe you're like me, you're going to read anything that's coming across your field of vision, whether it's a book, a newspaper, or a magazine, whatever it might be. This one actually I listen as an audiobook, which I like very much as well. Allows me to multitask. And I wanted to share what I really connected with and also how in my own career I can see that a lot of the advice and insight she's sharing are actually super valuable. And it's something you might have seen yourself already in your career, or maybe you've experienced it, or maybe you've seen it with your colleagues or your friends. Is that most people, most of us, we play the short game, and actually the real winners, these are the people who think decades ahead. And that's, I believe, very important to understand that, because I have realized that this idea of wanting to monetize everything I'm doing right away is actually first extremely stifling in terms of creativity, but also puts a lot of pressure. And there is not a lot of place for, fun and enjoyment. So when you start thinking about the very long game, it puts things into a different context. So I've always managed my career for the long game, but I would say like the last couple of years, and maybe, I don't know if it was post-pandemic or whatever, or maybe I started drinking the Kool-Aid of the people around me. I was way more focused on monetizing and getting value out of anything I was doing. And I think actually I didn't say yes to some opportunities that could have been great simply because I couldn't see the direct correlation. I do this, I'm paid, or I do this and I'm getting something. And I think it removed, some fun, but also some long-term success in my life. So as I was already changing, and when I say changing, re-becoming the long-term person I've always been, that book came across, and it was, sometimes it happens, the perfect book at the perfect time. So I wanted to share it because hopefully it will be the same thing for you, whether it's something you need to reconnect with or whether it's something that's new for you. But I really, really think it's probably one of the most insightful career book I have read. And like you, I'm sure, I've read tons of career book. It just rings very true. So let's discuss that. And again, it's really, that's why also I like that book. It's more like a playbook for people who want more than just the quick wins. And she really makes a compelling case for, strategic patience, which we don't always have, optimizing for interesting, I'll go in more detail in that, but also the power of deep long-term relationships. And I really, really am excited about sharing these takeaways because I really hope it will resonate with you and that it will help you. So the first thing I want to chat about is optimize for interesting, not just immediate gains. And that's what I told you. I missed a bit the plot in the last 2 years when I was so focused on immediate gains. And she, the author, Dorie Clark, she introduces a game-changing idea. Stop optimizing for the next paycheck or the next raise or the next title. Optimize for what fascinates you. And this is very counterintuitive because we live in a world that really praise specialization. Like specialization is king. But when you really think about it, most successful people are actually not narrowly focused. And yes, for every Tiger Woods who started their career at 2 years old, you have tons and tons of extremely, like a Roger Federer, for example, a lot of very, very successful athletes who dabbled with many sports and many different things before becoming extremely successful. So we've been sold, especially I would say in North America, through the education system that specializes very early. But specialization is the only way to go. And I argue it's actually the opposite, like I really think like Renaissance thinkers, who can weave different discipline together, different ideas, different relationships are the ones who are the most successful and actually bring the most to the table. So what does it mean for you? So uh, again, follow your curiosity, even if it doesn't have an immediate ROI. That I would really, really recommend to think about it. Second, invest in learning broadly because that's also something I noticed in my life. Cross-pollination of ideas really leads to breakthroughs. So something you might have learned in an activity that seems absolutely unrelated to your career might come handy. And it's exactly like cross-training in sports. And really don't box yourself in. I know people love to put us in one little box, but you're the one who's creating your narrative. You don't have to make the one size fits all and I need to be in a box. So again, the most valuable careers and the most valuable lives are multidimensional. So my take on that is really that mindset of looking more at what interests me, I think is probably the most important thing in my career. Instead of just chasing the next raise and the next promotion, um, I followed a lot of career. I did a lot of career moves based on what interested me. I never took a linear path. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, you can see that. And, as it turns out, interesting leads to innovation. And if you look at my career, it has spanned industries such as manufacturing, financial services, technology, health and wellness, public services across multiple cities, countries. So I've touched about many, many things, and maybe for some people it looks messy, but for me it is interesting. So it's something I would definitely recommend you to look at. Optimize for interesting versus short-term gains. The second takeaway I want to share is really about relationships and this idea that, the best relationships have no expiry date. And that's really one of the things I loved in our book. It was this approach to networking and relationship, because I think, unfortunately, the way we look at networking and relationship in the business world now has become not only very predatory, but also very short term. And I don't really think it makes sense. I think the second you look at relationship on a long-term basis, and when I say on a long-term basis, it's almost an infinite basis. Suddenly, you don't need a reason, a deadline, an immediate purpose. What matters is that you're enjoying the people you're with. This relationship exists because they're valuable in themselves, not because you're trying to get something from someone. And so she calls it, the authors calls that strategy, strategic serendipity. It's really this idea of cultivating relationships without expectation, trusting that opportunities will arise over time. And I would actually go one level further, is that if you're enjoying the people you're with, even if no opportunities arise anyway, who cares? You've already learned from these relationships in one way or the other, even if it's just enjoying a relaxing and maybe thought-provoking time. So what would that mean for you? So, build relationship with interesting people, not just useful ones. And maybe the interesting people will also be useful eventually, and maybe you will be useful as well. But don't go, with a knife between the teeth in networking events, or just random events, with this agenda written all over your face. And I mean, I've read all these networking books early on in my career, uh, and I think they're very confusing because maybe they're, I don't know, on the short term efficient. In the long term, I don't think it's the case. And again, I find it extremely predatory. And personally, that's not the way I want to live my life. So one of the things you've probably heard and read very much in the context of networking is give before you ask. And networking, again, it's about reciprocity. It's not about extraction. I would say it's not just about giving before you ask. It's also, okay, don't ask right away. She was saying she has a rule. She doesn't ask anything to anyone before a year of relationship. And I think it's actually, I'm not sure if you need to have a deadline like that, but I think it makes sense. You need to know people. They need to know you before making ask. And I'm sure you've been in that place where people ask you things, not only that are totally disproportionate with what a favor should be, but also way too early. Or it's someone who's going to cultivate you for a month or two, and then the ask going to come, and you're like, okay, I understand why suddenly you were interested in me 2 months ago. And I see that myself. I have sometimes, people who disappear and suddenly they reappear and they want to do stuff. And there is a ask coming because that's the third times they're going through that pattern. Don't do that, like it kind of shows actually. And the last thing is really about staying connected for the long haul. And, she's probably way more, she seems to be very well organized with that. And I see people who do that. They connect every quarter and all of that. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that once again, it lacks, from my perspective, a lot of art and the genuine approach. I have some people, and I have some people who don't contact me for a while and then we reconnect and it really doesn't matter. So I think again, this idea of staying connecting every quarter or every 6 months, yes, technically it is working, but again, if it's not because you want to see the person, but just because it's the date in your calendar, personally, I would not do that. So again, I think use also your own judgment, and with some people, well, every quarter that goes a bit too fast, like so maybe once a year, but that's good enough. In Canada, in Toronto, actually, we have in the summer and in the winter 2 weeks during which restaurants offer special fixed menus at discounted price. And I have a girlfriend, she was telling me she has one of her former colleague every year they're meeting at what is called Winterlicious, that's a special event, and Summerlicious. So they know they're going to see each other twice a year around this event. And I think that's such a great idea because it's not, oh my God, I need to stay in touch with a person. It's like, well, we always do Summerlicious together. We all, and I think that's a better way of staying in touch around something that excites you and that is fun with that person or these people. And that is not about, okay, check the box, I need to stay in touch. So, and that's how I operate. I have people where sometimes I don't reach out for a while and then I'm going to reach out because I don't know, I see something that make me think about them. So right now, as I'm sure you know, a lot of discussions with the Trump administration, what it means with tariff and the impact on Canada. Obviously, reading about that made me think about all my former contacts and friends at Invest in Canada. So I reached out to them, say, "Well, it's been so long, the pandemic, whatever." And it's not because I have an agenda; it's because something made me think about them. And I think that's way more organic and way more genuine. That's the way I act. And maybe people would think, well, why didn't I hear about her for 3 years? But because I'm doing it from a place of, authenticity, if it's badly perceived on the other side, well, I'm not responsible for how people perceive it, but from my side, it's authentic and it's genuine. So that's what matters to me. So, and I had a lot of opportunities in my career where, long-term connection became very valuable. I was offered an advisory mandate or a job or some getting on a board or an investment opportunity, things like that. And it was not relationships that were built on agenda, transaction. It was just genuine relationships between people who enjoy spending time together, which might seem odd, but I don't really see the point of spending time with people I don't like. So it really goes both ways, like I had someone, a gentleman who was actually way more senior than I, who 15 years ago when I moved to Toronto was kind enough to, guide me and have a couple of career conversation. Then he moved to the US, and when he wanted to come back to Canada not long ago, well, now I was way more senior, so I was able to connect him with people who were able to help him land his next job, So, and even if we were not in touch for 5, 6 years, it didn't matter. And the other way around, I was offered advisory mandate by people I was not necessarily in touch with for a few years either. So it's not just the number of touch points, it's the quality of these relationships. And, I don't cultivate people, and I really don't like being cultivated. Some people, they enjoy my company and I enjoy theirs. And it's as simple as that, because at the end of the day, people do business with people they genuinely like, not just the people who are in their life because they send them an email every quarter because it's the first Monday of the quarter. You know what I mean? So the third thing, which is linked again with networking, it's this idea again of give and take. And it's really this idea of what is the art of asking without being a taker. And the author Dorie Clark, she's a master in her book at breaking down, how to network without being predatory, which is something I really enjoy. Even if I would probably bring it to a next level, which is even more authentic and um, less structured. But again, that's my own personality. Because you have to have your own boundaries, because some people they just don't get it. And like some things like asking for an intro from someone you barely know, that's not okay. Demanding free coaching, free advice without offering any value, that is not okay. Um, Assuming that access to your network is a right and not a privilege, it's not okay. It seems obvious, but I can tell you every day of the week, everyone has this type of situation in front of them. Actually, I coach an entrepreneur, and our last coaching session 2 days ago was exactly about that, because she was so triggered by the fact that people constantly ask for help without giving anything in returns, and with the expectations that she's going to jump when they ask her for something. So it is very, very prevalent in our society. I mean, I see that every day. No matter how senior you are, you think that it's a question or you're not senior enough. I can tell you that I literally had an email like that yesterday. Someone I know who's very senior forwarded it to me. I'm like, who on freaking earth would dare ask him to do that? But I don't know. I think people totally lost their mind. So don't be like that. And maybe you see others acting like that. That's their problem. Doesn't mean you have to lower your values. Stay strong in your boundaries. It's a no. And you keep your own values of, authenticity and being genuine. So again, use common sense, which is difficult because common sense is not common. It is not because, well, you can always ask, one should ask, that it means you have a free pass to ask for anything at anyone at any time. That's absolutely not. So what does it mean for you? Obviously, be thoughtful in your asks, respect people's time, respect their boundaries. If you're asking for something that's going to be of value for your company, well, that needs to be paid. You wouldn't go to a hairdresser asking for a haircut and just leave. Same thing for advisory. If you want something that's going to bring value in your career and in your company, you need to offer something in exchange. As simple as that. And that something is not a $5 coffee, just FYI. Give before you take. We mentioned that earlier. Yes, no, that's different school of thoughts on that. For me, it's more about being genuine versus who ask first or who give first. But anyway, don't be transactional. Again, networking is about building trust, not making demands. Again, don't come with the knife between the teeth to extract something for someone. And, like I'm very sensitive to that topic because I've had my fair share of predatory networkers, like people who crossed my boundaries, who took without giving, who treated, our relationship as a one-way street. And that is very, I'm not sure if it's heartbreaking, but it really also, um, at least for me, it created a lot of feelings of low self-esteem and high self-hatred because I'm like, wow, that person, not only he or she is walking all over my boundaries, but on top of that, I'm doing what they ask me. So I look that for me like it's really bullying. The people who ask you things that are way too big for your relationship, they're bullies. They know what they're doing. So, and they know very well who to ask. And, the person was probably more on the people pleasing side is surrounded by people like that. And it has been my case. And it has been a growing, I can tell you that it has been a growing opportunity for me to learn to detect these people, protect my energy, and learn to say no. And that I think I hope for you you're in that situation because I was at a point where I didn't want to network. I didn't even want to meet new people because I could not handle anymore being constantly asked for stuff. So don't be that person if you're on the other side. And if you're like me, more sensitive and maybe more um, likely to be a target, take a step back, really check with your boundaries and good luck with that, just open your eyes because the best connections they're built on mutual respect, not extraction once again. And I really want to use that word of bullying. Someone who's asking for something that is way out of range is a bully. It's not someone who doesn't know what's happening. It's not, oh my God, I had no idea. Very often, I would say 90% of the case, not that there is a statistical study behind that number, but I would say in most cases, people know very well that what they've done. So again, these are bullies. They're not lost in translation. So and I have an allergic reaction to people like that now. Like there's nothing I hate more than bully, and it has different form. Bullies have different forms. You can call it narcissist if you want. And asking for too much, it is bullying for me. That I'm not a mark, like I don't want that. So and it's always same thing. Sometimes you face people like that and they think they're being subtle. But actually, inauthentic relationships are always obvious. And maybe it doesn't show the first day. Maybe it's going to be a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, but you're going to notice it and listen to your intuition because very often I rationalize so I wouldn't have to say no. I pretended I didn't hear my little voice telling me that person is taking advantage of you. And I can tell you that like man, woman, any age, any ethnicity, any background, there is not one profile. I've seen everything under the sun. So maybe that would be helpful if there was a profile, but I didn't see any. So the fourth thing that I really, really like is what she called the 20% rule. And maybe you know that thing from Google where you as an employee, if you're a Google employee, can allocate 20% of your time to project you're interested in and not necessarily in your job definition, but it allows you to tag along different projects you might be interested for your future career and all that stuff. So it's a bit the same logic, which is really um, playing the long term, the long game daily. So looking at what is that 20% rules where you dedicate 1/5 of your time to long-term projects. And a rationale, which I agree with her, is that if you're not having in mind, and not just in mind, in time, in resources allocation, your next things, and that next thing might be 5, 10, 15 years, you're kind of stuck in survival mode. You're just doing what you're doing now. But I would go a bit further. It's not just the idea of survival mode. I think it's more this idea of you're not in charge, like, okay, maybe opportunities will show up at your work, but it's not something you would have selected. Maybe you would have chose something different. So you're more an order taker than an order giver in that context. So if you allocate some of your time and resources to what could be of interest to you and maybe what could become your next thing, you don't know yet. Maybe it's going to become a nothing. You're really on the back foot. You want to be on the front foot. So what it means for you? Well, obviously that means set aside some time every week, every day, depending on how you get organized. Some like big picture thinking, but it's this idea that projects will not necessarily pay off today, and maybe they will in 5, 10 years. But I'm also from back to interesting. They might never pay off, like maybe you're going to do something for a couple of years and then it was great. You learned a lot of things. Well, in that context, then they pay off. But it's not your new career. That's what I mean. So maybe it's one of the small blocks in your overall picture, but it's not your next big thing. So I think it's important to avoid short-term thinking traps. Again, back to the first point, which is immediate monetization, like where you want right away to get a ROI, because otherwise you're never really doing something that's going to build into the long term. You're just staying where you are and monetizing everything you're doing right now. And what's important is that it's like money compounding, is that sometimes we forget how much our effort can compound over time. So every small step in one direction might end up again in a year, 2 year, 3 years with something way bigger that you could not have anticipated. But it's also, this strategic serendipity. But again, to be able to have, that's where we come back to the networking, to be able to have this 20% time, because I'm sure you're going to say, wow, I already don't have time to do what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I cannot allocate 20% on top of that of my time to new activities that might never pay off. But, that's why it's important to do something that's interesting first. And second, that's also why these rules of networking, where you need to learn to say no to opportunities. And opportunities, it's not difficult to say no to something that's obviously not interesting. The most difficult is these things that are in the middle. Okay, so maybe you're offered to talk at a conference in a city, whatever, or a 2 hour flight from where you are. Okay, they pay the flight, but they don't pay the talk. But there might be interesting people in the audience, but at the same time, that means you're taking 3 or 4 days off. So it's the type of thing that's very difficult to assess because you have pros and cons on both. That's where also your intuition is playing a key role. And these are this type of opportunities where learning to say no, especially when you're more advanced in your career. When you're early in your career, actually, you should say yes to everything. But when you're way, further in your career, learning to say no allows you to free up this 20% time. Same thing with all the fake networking and all the requests people ask of you that you could spend your entire day working for other people, and helping them against nothing. So again, connect the dots with everything I said by having very clear idea of what relationship you want, looking for interesting projects on the long term, saying no to things that don't, really excite you and don't really have value. Well, you can create this 20% time. So that's the thing. So and for me, took me 2 years to find a job in Canada from France. every night I was applying to jobs. Every night I was, like working, redoing my resume, redoing my thing, da, 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 da. So 2 years. To get into venture capital took me 10 years, 10 years of small moves, doing more studies in what direction, going to conference, networking, learning, speaking, da, 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 da. And some of the bets and investments I made, they never worked out. They never worked out. And that's just a reality. So you can look at it, it was lost. Yes and no, because along the way I learned things about an industry, about a project, about myself. So it's never totally lost, but at the same time, bon, you also want to minimize all these projects that have maybe no probability to be successful. That's why it needs to be interesting, because if it's not successful, well, it's less painful if at least it was interesting. So, um, and what's very important as well, that's the last thing, is like knowing what you don't want is as important as knowing what you want. So sometimes all these special projects you're doing on the side also allows you to think, well, no, I thought that was great, but it's not great. I'm not interested in that. So, and you might think, oh, well, I wasted time doing that because I don't like it. But it's actually the other way around. You invested time and the value is, you don't like it. So now you're not, it's a door that you closed. And, opportunities, it's as much about saying yes than it is to say no. So I mean, the bottom line of that book, you would have understood, like the big lines. And I think the question for everyone was reading it, listening to it, or just listening to this podcast is to question yourself. Are you playing the long game? So when you look at how you manage your relationship or you manage your careers, what you're doing within your day job and on the side, are you obsessed with these instant results, quick wins, shortcuts, which gonna actually on the long term prevent you to really be widely successful? And because the real success comes from long-term thinking. And when I say long-term thinking, it's not just long-term thinking, it's long-term relationship, all this expertise. So really, like if you want to really build a meaningful career versus just chasing the next gig, if you believe in long-term relationship versus transactional relationship, if you see success more as a marathon than a sprint, I would really recommend, again, read the book. You will I'm sure you'll see some things that are different from what I saw. So it's I would say it's really a must read. I would really recommend it. And one of the question I want to leave you with is, what's the one long-term bet you're making on yourself this year? I don't know. Are you taking a class? Are you trying a project? Are and if you're not, maybe you should. Are you going to a conference out of a city, or can be in your city, but on a different topic to open your mind? And I would highly recommend that, because most of the people I work with, it's very interesting in my coaching practice. A lot of them complain about the lack of balance in their life, but also the lack of passion. But they constantly do the same thing with the same people. It's a bit difficult to be passionate when every Saturday night is the same schedule and every Wednesday morning is the same schedule. You know what I mean? So I know personally that traveling, but not just traveling for pleasure, but traveling around a conference, around an event, meeting people. Maybe you saw the podcast from last week, my trip to Washington, meeting new people, asking questions, understanding what they're doing, what are they seeing, even if there is no business coming from that, it really gets my creativity going, and it connects a lot of dots for me. So find your thing. I know for me, it's really, I can go to a conference on pretty much anything, ideally out of town, so I can really think about it for 2 days, and it really gets my juices going. So think about it, allocate maybe a small budget, allocate an amount of time, and you don't necessarily have to take a class that's going to teach you a new language or whatever on artificial intelligence. And maybe it's a conference on, reinventing capitalism or anything. Japan in the 19th century, whatever could be interesting for you. And it doesn't even have to be expensive. You can even look at your local universities. They do lectures all the time. You can just go, if traveling is too expensive, too difficult to manage, you just take an evening, 2 hours, and you go listen to a lecture. So there are a lot of options. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you want to learn more about me, you can look at my website, peggyvandeplassche.com. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Take care.